We tend to think of history as just a bunch of stories, right? Epic tales that get passed down. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if history is actually a science, with rules and tools as strict as anything you'd find in a lab? That one idea, well, it changes everything.
I mean, it's a pretty fair question. When you're reading about something that happened hundreds of years ago, how do you really know it's true? How can you be sure it wasn't twisted or exaggerated or maybe even just completely made up?
And this is where a truly pioneering historian named Asad Rustum comes in with a fascinating answer. He argued that to get to the truth, a historian can't just be a storyteller. Nope, they have to be a detective. And the past, that's the crime scene. So this first part is all about a massive shift in how we look at things. Asad Rustum wanted to take history from the realm of storytime and turn it into a critical, verifiable science. So you've got these two ideas fighting it out. On one side, the popular view, history is just a narrative, a tale we tell ourselves. But Rustum's vision, that was totally different. He saw it as a tough, rigorous discipline built on cold, hard evidence and a systematic hunt for the truth.
All right, so what was the one big idea that drove all of Asad Rustum's work? What's the bedrock that his entire method is built on?
This quote, it says it all. For Rustum, everything, and I mean everything, starts and ends with the sources. If you don't have them, you're just dealing in myths and guesswork. History isn't what someone wrote about the past. It's what the past physically left behind for us to find.
So what are these sources, or al-usul in Arabic? Just think of them as the raw materials, the actual stuff. The letters, the legal documents, the crumbling ruins, the coins, the records. These aren't history books. They're the actual bricks you use to build history.
Okay, so if the sources are the foundation, how do we make sure that foundation is actually solid? Well, Rustum laid out this incredibly clear three-step method that a historian has to follow before they can even think about writing a single word of their own. And here they are. First, collection. Second, using what he called auxiliary sciences. And third, source criticism. If we stick with our detective analogy, this is like 1. Gather all the evidence from the scene. 2. Get the right forensic tools to analyze it. And 3. Put that evidence on trial. Step 1, at Taqmish, or collection, is all about being a completist. This quote really nails it. You can't just pick and choose the evidence that fits what you want to say. A detective has to bag up everything from the crime scene, not just the clues that are easy to find. Step 2 is where it starts to feel like a real investigation. Once you've got this pile of ancient documents, what do you do with them? You need a very specialized toolkit, the auxiliary sciences. We're not just talking about reading here. We're talking about knowing ancient languages, being able to decipher old, tricky handwriting, knowing how to identify official government seals, and even analyzing the very paper and ink to see if they're from the right time period. And that's it, right there. This is the exact moment the historian stops being just a reader and becomes a forensic investigator, looking at the physical evidence itself to figure out where it came from and if it's the real deal. All of that leads us right into step 3, source criticism. And this is a two-pronged attack. First, there's external criticism, which asks, is the physical document itself legit? Is this an actual artifact or a clever fake? Then you move to internal criticism, which asks, okay, the paper is real, but is this story it's telling believable? Does it make sense? So this all sounds pretty smart in theory, right? But how does it actually hold up in the real world? Well, Rustum gave us a perfect case study to show his method at work. So the case centered on this one super important document about the Al-Barak Wall, or the Wailing Wall, which was presented by Haj Amin al-Husseini. The document claimed to be from the year 1840. The million-dollar question was it authentic? And this is where the rubber meets the road. Let's just walk through this table. For external criticism, they checked everything. The type of paper, the official Diwani script of the handwriting, the government titles used, the archival numbers, it all screamed 1840s Egypt. It was physically real. Then, for internal criticism, the content, the actual story it told, lined up perfectly with what was known about the politics of that time. And the final nail in the coffin? They found totally separate documents buried in the Cairo archives that confirmed the story. The verdict was in. The document was 100% authentic.
But, a full-on forgery isn't the only thing a historian has to worry about. There's a much sneakier danger out there, what Rustum called aldas. That's when someone takes a real, authentic old document and secretly adds their own text into it. A great example is the famous book Al-Iqd al-Farid. Scholars were looking at different copies of it, and they found something impossible. Some versions included biographies of rulers who lived and died long after the original author was dead. There's only one way that could happen. Somebody, years later, came along, added new material to the original manuscript, and that fraudulent edition just got copied over and over until people assumed it was original.
And cases like that are exactly why Rustum hammered home this warning. A historian's default setting just can't be to believe everything. It has to be a disciplined, methodical skepticism. You have to question it all.
So why does any of this matter beyond just a nerdy debate about history? Because what Rustum was really doing wasn't just inventing a new system. He was helping to rediscover a really deep part of his own scientific heritage. And this, for me, is the most powerful point of this entire explainer. This intensely critical, evidence-based scientific way of examining texts, it's not some modern idea that was imported from the West. In fact, Rustum showed that his method was a direct echo of the incredibly detailed techniques that were developed centuries earlier by classical Arab and Islamic scholars. Specifically, the scholars of Hadith who built an entire science just to verify reports about the Prophet Muhammad. So Rustum was consciously linking the modern way of doing history back to this rich, indigenous tradition of critical thinking. And that leaves us with this really powerful, final question to think about. If this spirit of scientific criticism is so deeply embedded in this heritage, what other so-called modern ideas are we just overlooking? What other intellectual treasures are just sitting there in our own history, waiting for us to rediscover them?